Good evening, everyone. Well, that's very nice. I feel like I don't need to introduce myself, but I do because there's many people in the room that I don't know yet. I am Jen Mamlett. I am the very proud Executive Vice President at JCC Association. Perhaps the only role that feels as good as that in my life was when I was the executive director of the JCC of Central New Jersey. And I always loved being in this room, and I have to say, from this vantage point, seeing this many people feels particularly good. I would love to invite anybody who is at Mifgash for your first time experience to please stand up. We are so excited to welcome you not only into this room, but into this conversation. It feels appropriate if I'm asking people who are here for the first time to stand, to ask people who have been, let's see, to Mifgash ELS for more than 10 times to please stand. I won't keep going because we have an agenda to get to tonight, but I think it's remarkable to be in a room where not as many people who have been to more than 10 have been to their first, but it tells you the breadth of experience that we have here tonight. I also want to acknowledge my colleagues from JCC Association who are in the room. Many of them were recognized earlier, and I'm going to share their names one more time because to steal language from Ron Clark, these are our movement's runners. I want to acknowledge Brian Schreiber, Mark Young, Rachel Felber, Sawyer Schwartz, Dory Donnell, Leah Garber, Joanne Harmon, Michael Feinstein. I also want to acknowledge those colleagues that you have not yet been introduced to, the fellow members of the senior team at JCC Association who are also here and who also are people you must get to know. Sam Cohen, Rabbi Irv Elson, Jeff Jacob, Marshall Levin, the newest member of the team, and Gabe Most. And if we are runners, we certainly have one phenomenal runner who is always just ahead of all of us. It gives me, it's a great honor to introduce to you tonight's speaker to inspire us and to talk about the state of our movement, Doron Krakow, President and CEO of JCC Association.
Well, that was very loud. Good evening, everybody. I have been talking to a number of friends in this room, and I have to say that the number of people who have become friends in this room in these recent years has multiplied to a remarkably blessed degree for me that I'm quite nervous about this presentation tonight. Many of you know that I do plenty of public speaking over the course of the year in local communities and other organizational settings in a variety of frameworks. But once a year, I get to make the single most important presentation that I make. I get to stand in front of a room of the most important leaders in the North American Jewish community and reflect a little bit on what it means to lead in complicated times, on what it means to have the opportunity, the blessing, the responsibility to guide the most important institutions in Jewish life on this continent to something better than we are. And you can be an intimidating group for me. Take that for what it's worth. And then when you throw in Brian sticking it to me with his opening remark today about my keeping to a schedule and a handful of other snide comments, where's Steve Rogers? Always good to see you, Steve. And if that wasn't hard enough, thank you very much. I had to follow Ron Clark today, so while you all were enjoying the reception, I was trying on various costumes. I tried 3 times to jump up on a table without standing on a chair first. You'll notice I made it to the stage without a limp, so that's a sign that I almost made it without hurting myself. And I'm back behind the podium, which Ron said is a really crappy way to present. So that really has not worked out well for me. But nevertheless, this is a remarkable and I think very important moment, and it should not be lost on any of us that this is the largest gathering of senior JCC executives in the century-long history of our movement. So we have talked a lot about how to frame the conversation tonight, how to present these remarks and how we should title it, and we talked about a state of the movement, and I have thought long and hard about what that presentation would be like, and you're going to get a little of that, but not nearly as much as you might have expected. I'm in a reflective mood. And I have been thinking quite a bit about the journey that I have taken over my still relatively brief tenure in the JCC movement. One thing I can tell you for sure is that when I came to my first, what we used to call executive leadership seminar as CEO in Las Vegas, Nevada in January of 2018, I hardly knew anybody in the room. Every introduction was a chance to make a first impression, to try to represent that I had some understanding or insight of the work that the people who had gathered there were doing. There were only a few familiar faces, and it was a time to prove myself as the new CEO. And not that the responsibility to prove ourselves has ever gone away, but what's extraordinary is as I walked the halls and the reception and the sessions here, there are very few people in this room whom I don't already know, with whom I have not already spent time. In fact, the overwhelming majority of JCCs represented here have been gracious hosts in the visits that I have made around the field. And I have already begun to speak to the roughly 20 of you that are here who have not yet had the chance to strut your stuff with me as a visitor coming to your community to learn how it is that you do the remarkable things that you do. We have also talked a great deal about challenges relating to staffing, which I've been hearing quite a bit about in a variety of sessions already, and I've had a chance to spend a little time with the just graduated Kivunim 22 class and the newly minted Kivunim 23 class, an extraordinary group of more than 20 CEOs who are here. But you should know that since January of 2020, only 3 years ago, we have welcomed 50 new CEOs to JCCs across our field. "42 of them CEOs for the first time, 42 Kivunim participants. That is both extraordinary relative to the onboarding of great new talent, but telling about a field of 170 institutions that we have turned over nearly a third of the field in the space of only 3 years. And some of that is normal attrition, and some of that is COVID, and some of that is a lot of little reasons. But it means both that we have onboarded extraordinary new strength and talent, and we have seen extraordinary wisdom and expertise fade from the scene, leaving us with both a sense of gravitas and responsibility. I've been reflecting also on the fact that when I arrived 5 years ago, I thought I understood JCCs based on my fast learning curve onboarding of my own. I've shared this story a few times that looking to make a quick move up the curve when I got here, and I'll remind those of you who don't know, this is the first job I ever had that had a JCC in the paycheck. The crash course couldn't have been fast enough for me, and yet, told that if I saw 3 or 4 JCCs, I would get the idea, I hurried to see 3 or 4 and felt like I got the idea until I saw the 5th one, which didn't seem very similar to the ones I had seen before, much less the 6th or the 7th. And 5 years later, and some 130-odd JCCs down the road, I share with you something that I think you all know implicitly, which is that no 2 of the JCCs in our field are alike. They are all unique and fundamental reflections of local community, local leadership, local talent, local capacity, local challenges, and local resources. And each one is a unique opportunity to deliver better than what we have delivered so far. And when I am talking to audiences other than this one, and sharing what it is that we do as a movement, I'm talking about you, the people in this room and the institutions that you lead with such abiding dedication. I am telling individual stories about what I saw and who I met and what moved me and what I took back. What are the tales, the anecdotes of our movement that illuminate the purpose for which we operate? And if I had enough time, and Brian hadn't stuck me with a too short window on the schedule, I could go around the room and tell a story about almost every one of you and your facilities and institutions. That is the narrative of the work of Jewish community building that we are carrying forward. And among the things that we are doing across the field are celebrating milestone anniversaries as your JCCs are hitting round-numbered decades or a century of history or more. And as a result of my desire to be useful when I come out to share in the celebration, I am gradually becoming a bit of an historian of our movement. And I will tell you that not long ago I stumbled on a book that I didn't know existed and that my friend and mentor Alan Finkelstein didn't know existed. The book is called The Young Men's Hebrew Associations, 1854 to 1913. And it is a fascinating tale of the beginnings of what has become our extraordinary movement. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these historical facts, but I think you ought to know that our movement goes back to 1854, when the first continuing operating JCC in our movement opened its doors in Baltimore. And you should know, before you pat Barack on the back, because I know he takes great pride in having been the first, that he wasn't the first. That the JCC, the YMHA in Philadelphia, began 2 years before Baltimore, but closed its doors when it didn't make a go of it. Baltimore began and Philadelphia began again not long thereafter. You should know that from our history, the first YMHA preceded the first YMCA by more than a year. We are not modeling ourselves on something we saw being done nicely elsewhere. It's actually quite the reverse. And you should know that the people who were involved in the early days of our movement were a who's who of the most influential Jews in the United States. Names like Louis Marshall and Jacob Schiff, Sulzberger, Ox, the Warburgs, Solomon Schechter, Julius Rosenwald, Judah Magnus. The list of names and influentials who were involved in what we do was the who's who list of leaders in Jewish life in North America. And while we talk about the fact that we began, this incarnation of us at JCC Association began in 1917 as the Jewish Welfare Board, dedicated to helping and supporting the spiritual needs of young men going off to war, a mandate that we still proudly carry forward to this very day, that wasn't the beginning of JCC Association either. As it turns out, that was the last time that we began after a series of false starts that were intended to achieve something that later included our work with JWB. But we began in 1880 as the American Hebrew Association. In addition to being the representative body of the growing number of YMHAs and related institutions across the United States, it was founded to be the singular entity dedicated to the protection and promotion of Jewish interests in the United States. So when we talk about our mandate today as being the authors of the next chapter of Jewish history on this continent, this is not a new idea. It was Schiff and Warburg and Marshall and others that understood that this was going to be the preeminent place and the preeminent locus. And while time and tides resulted in different organizations and frameworks finding their way onto the scene, and we emerged in our fourth incarnation in 1917 as the Jewish Welfare Board, today we return to the beginning in terms of the relative importance that we play with regard to the evolving nature of Jewish life on this continent. And tonight we have gathered the largest and most comprehensive and most formidable collection of leaders that this movement has ever gathered in a single place. So let's take a couple of minutes, but just a couple of minutes, to reflect a little bit on the state of our field at the end of a complicated and sometimes bumpy 2022. And for most of you, I'm not going to share anything that you don't already know to be true or you don't already think is applicable to you. We have emerged from the darkest parts of the pandemic, out of the dark, but not yet out of the woods, remarkably intact, given how at risk we were when the pandemic's onset first presented itself roughly 3 years ago. That today, demand for early childhood education and for summer camp programs have reached or exceeded the levels that they were at prior to the onset of the pandemic. And while the third significant routine source of revenue for most JCCs, membership and fitness, hasn't quite caught up, we are approaching 85 to 90% of where we were before the pandemic began. And JCC after JCC is reporting that month over month it's getting better. We haven't quite gotten back to where we were, but thanks to the enormous commitment of government resources in both Canada and the United States, and thanks to an outpouring of philanthropic commitment, both the brand name philanthropists who came to the aid of our field and the tens of thousands of local donors of all sizes who had never previously gifted or given or donated to JCCs, but who did in the face of the pandemic, we came to the end of 2022 on balance with money in the bank. We're not without our stresses and strains, but the durability of the business is no longer in the crosshairs. And yet, what we know to be true, what we've heard in the hallways from the first moments that we were here over the last 48 hours now for those who arrived before Kivunim, is that staffing remains a problem. The labor market remains difficult. Employment is an issue. Recruitment and retention, this is what Ron Clark was talking about, standards and excellence, appreciation and support, and sobriety in the face of members of our staff that aren't getting the job done are the ways in which we continue to lean in the direction of being more than what we've been. And maybe, if you follow the business press, you're seeing the same signs that I'm seeing, and that day after day, it's the announcements about big companies laying off staff in the financial sector, in the technology sector, in the corporate sector as an indication that the worm is starting to turn relative to there being an excess supply of jobs relative to the demand for staff. People are going to be out there and they're going to be looking for work, and the leverage is going to return to the employer in ways that we probably have forgotten because it feels like it's been so long since we sat on that side of the dynamic. That doesn't mean we've solved the issue. We have not solved the issue, and the problems of today are the problems of today. But we have reason to be optimistic that things are going to improve, that this is a cyclical aberration and not an indication that it's just going to get forever harder to staff and employ. We have a chance to be more than that. And I want to come back again to something that Ron said, and I never met Ron Clark before, but can't wait to meet him again after his presentation this afternoon. Our positioning in the Jewish community has been elevated as a result of the work that you did in the depths of the pandemic. When everybody else was closed, but your doors were open. When everybody else was desperate for a safe place to operate, and your doors were open with a warm welcome to come and operate at the JCC for programs that couldn't be operated without you. That you were going to be there to ensure not just that your programs were as successful as they could be, but that the response to the community and the members of the community in greatest need were your responsibility and your challenge, and what turned out to be your opportunity, because at the end of these 3 years, not necessarily the end of the pandemic, but the end of these 3 years, our profile and standing and credibility in the community is simply up. We are being seen and we are being recognized. And so if we decide we're going to hold ourselves to a standard of quality worthy of the aspirations of the best people in the community, then we will solve our labor problems that way, not in a desperate grab for anybody, but in an openness and willingness to accept the best of what's out there to join the preeminent engine for doing the great works of the Jewish community here. I want to say a couple of words about last year at JCC Association as well. You guys follow the bulletins and the updates. We also had a year filled with ups and downs. Some bumpy days that related to the labor crisis as well, some bumpy days that related to accessing unrestricted resources for the purposes of advancing our business. We experienced in 2022 what most of you have been experiencing since 2020, and we got a good dose of what it feels like to be in the crosshairs of those things, and we didn't like it any more than you did. It obliged us to lean and celebrate the successes that were happening so that we didn't lose the spirit of the work that we were doing, and to recognize that whatever the major challenges and problems were, we were going to need to attack them in order to overcome them, not learn to live with them, but to overcome those issues, to restore ourselves to the place that we needed to be, to serve and guide and be what this field requires that we should be. That was 2022, and here I'm standing in front of you again, thinking back not just on a year ago when we gathered together in Houston at what was then, by the way, the largest gathering that we had ever had in our history, and it was, by the way, about 30 or 40% smaller than what we are this year. Now, what we're going to do to beat this next year remains to be seen, but my hopes and expectations are quite high. 5 years ago, when I stood in front of this group in Las Vegas, we talked about the fact that JCCs as a platform and JCC Association as a central agency was largely unrecognized in the halls of power of the organized Jewish community. In the most significant boardrooms and discussions and deliberations, we were hardly mentioned. In fact, on the eve of my start in my tenure here at JCC Association, I met with an old friend and colleague, Alan Hoffman, who at the time was the Director General of the Jewish Agency for Israel, disproportionately responsible for Jewish education and Jewish identity building in communities around the world. And we spent an hour in his hotel on the west side of New York. And at the end of the hour, as he was walking me to the door, he said, "Doron, I want you to know that the last 60 minutes are the most time I've spent thinking about JCCs in more than a decade." The last 60 minutes were the most time I've spent thinking about the largest and most expansive platform for the engagement of Jews and Jewish families of every age in more than a decade. We had been lost to the radar of Jewish life for a variety of reasons over a period of years. And where are we 5 years later? 5 years later, we are a founding partner of the Jewish Together Coalition, together with JFNA. 5 years later, we have a seat on the Executive Council of the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations. 5 years later, we are in significant collaborative relationships with the three major denominations of Congregational Judaism. 5 years later, the roster of partners that we could showcase to you at this conference is too big to fit on 3 screens. So we've put a selection of interesting collaborating partners with our movement today, all places that are looking to you as the greatest opportunity they have to achieve the strategic ends of their organizations and agendas. 5 years ago, I stood before this group and said, we are determined to reverse the direction of the flow of financial resources in this movement. 5 years ago, when the dues that we received from affiliated JCCs across the field were providing almost 50% of our annual revenue, we said that the proper balance is that whatever comes in, we should be putting multiples out in the way of resources that we provide to you and support the field. 5 years ago, half of our operating revenue came from you, On Thursday this week, when the JCC Association Board meets to consider the budget of the association for 2023, we expect that that total is about 15%. The support that we're getting from the field. And by the way, before you go on thinking that that means we must not be getting a lot of support from the field, 5 years ago there were 111 affiliated member agencies in this movement, financially contributing agencies. Today, first of all, there are 170 affiliated agencies in our movement, and going on 150 of them are contributing financially to the investment in our field. And the investment that they're contributing to is not so that we can operate. It is each of those JCCs shares in the work of all of us. The connective tissue, our ability to make of ourselves not just a loose association of agencies, but a highly connected, integrated collection of uniquely charged and responsible agencies for aspects of what we can only do together when we do it across the entire movement. 5 years ago, I came before the board of JCC Association and I said, for all of the dreams and fantasies that we have as a central agency for this field, the world of Jewish philanthropy has unlimited resources to fulfill our wildest dreams. And while for the next few years I took it on the chin from members of the board who kept looking to me for those unlimited resources that I promised would appear, we spoke not about immediate gratification, but about altering the perception of JCCs and the JCC movement in the minds of the greatest funders in the land. 5 years ago, JCC Association brought in a total of $2.3 million in funding commitments in that fiscal year. Not cash, funding commitments that were received in 2016. And as the chart behind me will show you, between 2016 and 2022, we increased the financial commitments that are coming into JCC Association in support of our movement by a factor of 10. And the principal shepherd and author of that work, who took us from where we were to where we are, is the Executive Vice President of JCC Association, Jennifer Manley. And I want to spend a little bit of time telling you about the $25 million that we raised in 2022 so that you understand it, and understand that that money was raised in fulfillment of the notion that we are going to be pouring resources back into the field. The overwhelming majority of that $25 million will be spent where you work, not where we work. So let's talk about how that breaks down. Many of you have heard a lot about Project 412. And before we get further into it, I want to underscore the nature of what this project is all about. We have a problem in the North American Jewish community stemming from the fact that while we have 35,000 children in our early childhood education programs, and our partners at the Union for Reform Judaism, the second largest player, have 30,000 children in their early childhood education programs, between us we have more than 25,000 children on waiting lists. 25,000 children banging on the glass to get into Jewish early childhood education and being told that there's no room at the inn. And when we began the conversation, Rick Jacobs and I and others from our agency and from theirs, about what the reason was that we had so many people unable to take part in our programs, we said, well, it's got to be because there aren't enough classrooms. Until we did a deep dive, actually it wasn't that deep, to discover the fact that there are more classrooms than you can shake a stick at in most of the communities in which we operate. They aren't all in our buildings, but there are unused classrooms across institutions in the Jewish community. Classrooms are not our problem. Our problem is teachers. There aren't enough teachers because we woefully underinvest in what it takes to recruit and retain and elevate and celebrate teachers. And therefore, if we are going to break the logjam and throw open our doors to those tens of thousands of families that are waiting to get in, We're going to have to invest in teacher recruitment and teacher training and teacher retention and teacher compensation. And that's why Project 412, this is Pirkei Avot 4.12, the wisdom of the elders that says, let the honor of your student be as dear to you as your own, and let the honor of your colleague as the reverence for your teacher, and the reverence for your teacher as the reverence of heaven. If we expect to enable those tens of thousands of families to join the tens of thousands of families already in our care, then what could possibly be more important than making sure that we had the best of the best of the best, welcoming those children and caring for them and their families through our programs? And so we got together with the URJ and later joined by the Jewish Federations of North America. We did a year of deep dive task force related work with practitioners and funders and academics, looking at the challenges that we face, and then recruited the Jim Joseph Foundation and the Crown Family Philanthropies and the Samuels Foundation out of Houston to fund a pilot program which we have called Project 412, and which will begin in 2023 in 14 pioneer communities that have been carefully selected by the leading early childhood experts in the Federation system, the Jewish Community Center Association, and the URJ on the basis of the tools and resources that are ready to be brought to bear. And in these 14 communities, we will operate 2-year pilots to test and assess a series of well-thought-out initiatives in connection with recruitment, training, and professional development that will add 30 new teachers in each of these 14 communities over the course of 2-year pilots, a group of 6 in the first 2 years, a group of 8 in the second 2 years, in which we are going to invest over $12 million in funding, the large majority of it having been raised by national partners to be invested in these 14 communities on the basis of a modest local match, $250,000 over 2 years for each of the 14 communities. And the goal of the pilot is what pilots are supposed to do, to teach us what works and what doesn't, what conditions are required to achieve greater success, and what efforts are being wasted on approaches that can't produce the results that we need. And our major funders are already on board with an in-principle commitment to increase by a factor of 10 the amount of funding that they're going to put towards the scaling of the successful elements of Project 412. Because the goal is not to be successful in 14 communities. The goal is to be successful in every community in this room. The elevation of our commitment to the recruitment, retention, and appropriate compensation of our teachers. This work is getting underway, also under the leadership and direction at this stage of Jen Mamlet in her role as Executive Vice President. We raised, in addition, significant investment from a host of programs relating to bring campers, staff, and families into your care. With the help of the Marcus Foundation here in Atlanta, Georgia, Operation Summer Camp is getting underway. $1 million a year to provide full scholarships to up to 100 campers a year whose families are either active duty military personnel or recently completed active duty service. And our goal is to make this program available to every one of the 24 overnight summer camps in our system. Because those of you who have tuned in and connected with the work of JWB know that these are transient families, unplugged and disconnected from community and support networks as they are deployed and assigned to different parts of the country and around the world. And a connection to overnight Jewish summer camp anchors you in a community that you carry with you, no matter where you live or travel to or return to in between camping seasons. $3 million was raised this year from the Marcus Family Foundation for Operation Summer Camp. Under the extraordinary leadership of our JCC Maccabi team, headed by Sam Cohen, In 2022, JCC Association generated commitments of over $5 million in new funding for JCC Maccabi, disproportionately focused on bringing the games to Israel this summer as part of our celebration of Israel at 75. 1,000 JCC Maccabi participants from across the field. This will be the largest summer that the JCC movement has ever had in terms of sending high school students. And again, the foundations that have gotten behind getting the games to Israel understand, as most of you already do, that nearly 70% of the kids who begin a JCC Maccabi experience with us have had otherwise no prior ties to the Jewish community on their first day. These are disproportionately added kids to the engagement of Jewish life, to the experience of Israel, to the participation in the JCC movement, and to taking part in the JCC Maccabi Games. We have committed new resources, thanks to generous funding from several major benefactors, to talent development. We have just kicked off the Martin Pear Fellowship. Martin Pear, who for years sat with us in this room, was a long-time career JCC executive who completed his career in Scottsdale, Arizona at the Valley of the Sun JCC. And in his honor and memory, his belief and commitment to the idea that a passionate engagement with Israel should anchor the work of every Jewish professional. This program has been launched to take early JCC tenure professionals through a full-year professional development and enrichment program grounded in Israel as a core component of what it means to be a JCC professional. These are not early career professionals per se, they are early tenure professionals, professionals of every age and background. And look at the faces on the screen. They are a reflection of us, of who we are in all of our diversity. Beyond the work that we're going to do in JCC Maccabi this summer we'll see the largest number of participants in high school summer programs on JMI, which brings groups of our teens from JCC overnight camps across the field. In 2018, we had 150 teens in our programs on JMI in Israel. This summer, we're going to be approaching 300, and that number promises to continue to grow year over year. We have brought new commitments of $2 million to taking our teens from overnight summer camps to Israel this year. We have brought $1 million to help scholarship aspiring military chaplains through rabbinical or cantorial programs across any of the major denominations in Jewish life, advancing the significance of our partnership with them. JCC Association received more than $4.5 million in new legacy commitments from long-standing and dedicated JCC leaders. These are planned gifts that will be realized beyond their lifetimes, but significantly advance our commitment to the idea that the pipeline of the next generation of funding has to be primed now. Model leadership from members of our board who look to make this a component of what it means to be part of the board of the association and what we may be able to do to help you to secure the commitment of those leaders, donors, and board members in your communities to commit now to being part of the pipeline that's going to enable this work to continue beyond the end of our careers and into the next generation. And the support of the members of the board of JCC Association in these same 5 years has also grown by 50%. Those are unrestricted resources that go straight to the bottom line. So I want to recap what we have done across these $25 million and remind you about the deployment. That it was $8.5 million towards 12.5 in Project 412, $3 million for Operation Summer Camp, $2 million for the Martin Pear Fellowship, $5 million to bring the JCC Maccabi Games to Israel, $2 million to bring teen campers from across our overnight camping network, $1 million to create a pipeline of chaplains that are desperately needed in the United States Armed Forces, $4.5 million in legacy giving, $750,000 in unrestricted board campaign, and only that last $750,000 will pay for the operations of the traditional work of JCC Association. Every single one of those programs and initiatives will fund things that are going to take place in the field. The more things you and your community lean into accessing, the more financial benefit, the more investment we can make in you, the more we can stimulate an interaction that will allow us to continue to raise our game there. And here I want to say something very important. I want to come back to the fact that it is a colossal thing to achieve tenfold increase in a stream of revenue. But we started with next to nothing in philanthropic terms. So we've got 10 times next to nothing right now. It ain't nothing. But JCC Association is committing itself to the next tenfold increase in resource development in the field. And here's what I need you to understand. The names of the funding foundations who have begun to get behind the work of our movement with JCC Association as a gateway for investment in you are a growing list of who's who. And they're not all cutting the biggest checks and the biggest grants yet, but they are gathering. Because one thing that I have been saying since I got here, and it's the reason that I came here, which I have been saying to them, and slowly but surely they're saying back to me, is that this is the single biggest opportunity they have for giving expression to their strategic determination for something better in the organized Jewish community. And the more we are ready to embrace the deliverable that they're waiting for, which is a commitment to measurable and intentional Jewish outcomes, the quicker the line will grow. But it is growing and growing fast, and we are on the cusp of the first roughly $5 million in new initiatives to be funded in 2023 already, the first 2.5 weeks of a new calendar year. The great achievement lies ahead, but these last 4 years have been foundational relative to becoming what the field requires us to be. And here I want to say one other thing. It's nice to have audacious goals, and we should, because if your goals are modest, that's exactly what your achievement is going to be. We're going to aim remarkably high, and we're going to lift our game until we push ourselves to the place where we can say that we've reached the goals that we have achieved, and at the risk of embarrassing a friend and a colleague and a mentor, I will tell you that earlier this month we introduced JCC Association's new Chief Philanthropic Officer, whose bio you have to read, because I'm not going to describe it all to you here today, but what I will tell you is when I was learning what Major Gifts Philanthropy was all about, he was writing the book. And he wrote it for me and others so that we would be able to do the things that he had shown the way to doing. He is inarguably one of the best fundraisers in the organized Jewish community in the last 25 years, and I want him to stand and be recognized. JCC Association's new Chief Philanthropic Officer, Marshall Levin. Seek him out. Get to know him. He will be coming to see you in your communities in the coming weeks and months, and as long as it takes. I guess I'll embarrass him one more time by saying that on the eve of coming to an agreement to have Marshall come on board, and he came here not because we had the best paycheck to offer him, and he had his pick, but because he saw what it is that we're doing and the unique importance of our work right now. And I called one of the smartest people that I know in the Jewish world, and I said, is this too good to be true? Let me tell you the story. He knows Marshall, he knows me, he knows you. I said, what do you think about our bringing Marshall on board into this role? And without hesitating, he said, Doron, it's Tom Brady to the Buccaneers. And I think we know how that one turned out. Not this year. You know, right away at the beginning. All right, I'm keeping my eye on the time because Brian was needling me about how long I speak here, and I want to get to the good stuff. I want you to know a couple of things. I'm going to bundle. Hey, Janet. I want you to know that we hear you. I want you to know that we heard that our gathering professional cohorts during the worst days of the pandemic proved to be one of the most important, supportive, and significant things that we could do. and we have committed ourselves to restoring our work with peer communities. I want you to know that in addition to growing numbers of cohort-related programs like Martin Pear and the Merin Fellows, like Kivunim and J-Response, like this conference, Mifgash and others, that we are beginning this month new cohort peer communities under our stewardship and orchestration in human resources, in COOs and FRD, in membership, in arts and culture. In the coming month, in fitness and wellness, in youth and teens, in older adults, I want you to know that at your urging, we have continued without interruption to gather our overnight camp directors, our marketing communication professionals, our inclusion professionals, our early childhood professionals, our shlichim, our Jewish educators. I want you to know that when we hear that those things matter to the way you do your work, then they matter to the way that we do ours. And we will be determined to continue to raise our game. I want you to know that when we stand in front of you and talk to you about the importance of the numbers and the data, that we are significantly committed to being bigger and better in the way we acquire and mine and make available to you that data. I want you to know that when you look at the workforce survey that was released to you just days before our gathering here for Mifgash, 108 JCCs contributed significant data at great effort on their part. It's 25% more than have contributed to any prior survey. I want you to know that that survey is reflective of almost 6,000 individual staff members from across every geography and every size of JCC. I want you to know that in addition to the remarkable compendium that we produced last week, in the coming months we will produce a digital dashboard like we produce around benchmarking that will allow you to cut and slice and dice that data to your heart's content. I want you to know that we know how critically important it is for you not to rely on us every time you have a question, but to provide you the tools so that you can rely on yourselves. I want you to know that this follows the introduction of the JCC Resource Center almost exactly a year ago, and I want you to know that the more you lean into the data effort, the smarter you will be. Because the smarter the data becomes with every additional item of data that we gather. I want you to know that that work is continuing. I want you to know that when we talk about signature programs, the programs that we operate are under our flag that are intended to drive people through your doors. We are renewing and increasing our commitment and financial investment to them. I want you to know that after a 2-year hiatus, with remarkable leadership from our friends at the Lawrence Family JCC in San Diego, the JCC Maccabi Games came roaring back in 2022. 1,700 teams, and I want you to know that in 2023, thanks to a tremendous lift in commitment from our friends at the Posnack JCC in Fort Lauderdale, to our partners at Maccabi World Union and all those that are taking part in bringing 1,000 teams to Israel in the games this summer, we are expecting more than 2,500 kids this year, more than 85 delegations compared to just 57 last year. We are welcoming back JCCs that went away from JCC Maccabi years ago for a variety of reasons, but that this year we'll see the return of Boca Raton and the Sephardic Center of San Francisco, the Mid-Island Y, the Suffolk Y, the Newport News, Virginia JCC, and first-time delegations from the Hebrew Educational Society in Brooklyn and from JCC colleagues around the world, including from Ukraine and South Africa for the very first time. I want you to know that at the urging of people in this room, JCC Association embraced a commitment to the inclusion of children whose physical or cognitive needs and limitations prevented them from accessing their way to Jewish communal life as we offer it to so many others. And that in San Diego last summer, the JCC Maccabi Access Games began with 5 JCC delegations totaling 7 athletes in one of the most powerful and moving and frankly significant impact experiences that it has been my good fortune to witness in a more than 30-year career. And I want you to know that in 2023, at the Posnack JCC Games in Fort Lauderdale, we are expecting now 10 delegations and 30 athletes at least, in year 2 of a pilot that is intended to ensure that these kids are going to get access to JCC Maccabi every year in every set of games before very long. I want you to know that the work of understanding and elevating the impact of this movement means that when we look at aspects of what we do and feel that we're not doing enough, we look again, and we look again, and we look again. We are joined today by some of the most important leaders in the world of Jewish overnight camping. We are the largest network of Jewish overnight camps in North America, 24 overnight camps, far and away the largest network. We are the largest network of day camps in North America. There are more than 150 Jewish day camps operating under our auspice. And yet, aside from the idea that we'd like these programs to be more than what they are, open themselves to more kids and add significant enrichment to them, we have missed figuring out how to unlock the potential of what happens when you take 24 exemplary overnight camps and 150 remarkable day camps and 170 corporate JCC institutions and begin to explore what's possible when they lean into doing things together for the elevation and benefit of everybody. Not just the elevation and benefit of our field, but there is nobody out there that can marshal that kind of capacity and potential for the elevation of impact on Jewish life in North America. That's the work that we have thus far not quite unlocked. And so I am proud to tell you that JCC is now finalizing a contract with Immersive First, a consulting company with expertise in this field headed by an old friend from this room, David Phillips, the longtime CEO of Capital Camps in the greater DC, Baltimore area, to attack this issue for us. Who we want to be is not just another supporter of good camps. We want to make sure that our camps have all the support that they can get, and we will capitalize on as much support as possible from everybody that's in the support business. We need to do the work that they can't do, which is amplifying the impact of the collaborative work that can happen between these camps, both kinds, and our institutions in pursuit of greater good. February 1st, we'll see Jamie Simon, the longtime CEO of Tawanga, and the short-time quarterback of our work with our overnight camps, become number 2 at the Foundation for Jewish Camp. Great news for her, great news for the Foundation of Jewish Camp and the field of Jewish camping. And it will see David Phillips and Immersive First take on this portfolio for the JCC movement, including in the short term, the day-to-day support that our overnight camp directors are looking for while we work on a strategic horizon that has yet to be crossed and that we are determined to cross. Audacious goals, transcendent impact is the work that lies ahead. I want to express my gratitude to you before I take my last few minutes here to wrap this thing up. In September, we made an announcement both to the board and to the field that owing to the labor challenges that we had confronted in the middle of 2022, JCC Association would postpone the convening of ProCon as scheduled in 2023. With tremendous regret, because we know how much it matters. And you should know that while we have traditionally in our in-person ProCons gathered roughly 500 JCC professionals from typically 70 JCCs every other year, we recognized that based on what happened in 2021 when we mounted an online ProCon for the first time, and Sue Gelsey is here, who was the quarterback of that remarkable event. The 2021 ProCon drew over 3,300 JCC professionals from 153 delegations. And the message was loud and clear. What you're doing to gather the professionals from the field is not enough. There are too many of us that need access, and too many of us that need to figure out how to plug in. And when we said to the field we don't have the wherewithal for the lift in 2023, the field responded. You responded. And you may not all be aware, though many of you are, that what has come out of our postponement of the Continental ProCon in 2023 is 8 regional professional conferences. The first one ever that took place in the state of Texas in October of this year. The West Regional Conference to be hosted in Tucson in March, the Southeast Conference in Tampa, the Mid-Atlantic Conference at Capital Camps, a first-time conference in Lake Ontario and the Buffalo area, and pending additional announcements of dates and capacity in New York City, in the Deep South, and in the Midwest. The field said we need to gather. And if JCC Association can't carry all the weight itself, that we'll step into the breach and carry the weight together. And we will be with you at every one of those conferences. But what was necessary was to make the conference accessible, and thanks to those who have stepped forward, more than twice the number of people will have an in-person professional development experience than if we had proceeded as originally planned. We're watching, and we're learning from that too. So while we will get back in the business of gathering us on a continental level, we've got to think much more broadly. Regional gatherings, virtual gatherings, continental gatherings, new kinds of gatherings for new sets and subsets of the people who bring our JCCs to life. And that's where I want to go with you for these last few minutes. I think we all think we know what we're looking at when we talk about the work of the JCC. I think we all know what we want other people to think they're looking at when they look at the work of JCCs. I think we know that when we tell them, for example, that we have more kids in Jewish early childhood education programs than anybody else, that we want them to see that what we do for the youngest members of our community is to provide safe, nurturing, content-rich experiences in which to begin the journey of their Jewish lives. But it's bigger than that. And if you step back one full step to take a look at it, not in the two dimensions of the page in front of you with the data and the curriculum on it, but in three dimensions, you see that Jewish early childhood education is the preeminent gateway for the engagement of families with young children. It is the preeminent opportunity we have for welcoming families that could just as easily go somewhere else into the Jewish community where we have access not just for the stuff we do with the children in the classroom, but to their parents and to their families. And we all know when we were first-time parents that our social circles were comprised largely of the parents of the kids who were in programs with our kids. And we know that those families that are banging on the glass won't bang for long before they go away. And when they do, they go into the equivalent of Jewish community witness protection. We won't know how to find them until they call attention to themselves in the future. In two dimensions, early childhood education, Jewish early childhood education is about what we do in the classroom. In three dimensions, it's about the cornerstone building block of a family's Jewish life in connection with the organized Jewish community. And it's also nice for the kids. And I'll give you a couple of other examples, and we could go on all day. We talk about what we do with our camps every year, and we bemoan the fact that the key demographic in our world that we are missing out on are older teens and early 20s that the Jewish community can't connect with. But we hire them in their tens of thousands to work in camp every year. Older teens and early 20s who come to us in our auspices for 8, 9, or 10 weeks every year for intensive, immersive, intentional, Jewishly committed community building endeavors. Overnight and day camp looks like it's about the kids until you take a half step back and notice that there are two primary target populations that we're dealing with in the summer. Yeah, it's about the kids. But if you're not looking to engage and capitalize on the collection of staff that you gather every year, you have missed the forest for the trees. They are the future ranks of the people in this room and every professional position that we have. And they're coming to us on purpose and not because we pay a great wage when it comes to summer camp. And we shouldn't have to, because the experience that we give them is unrivaled and incomparable, and they do it again and again. There are more. I won't get into all of them, I will tell you that one of the great gifts to the Jewish community that has been given by Jewish philanthropy was created by the Harold Grinspoon Foundation. It's called PJ Library. Just quick show of hands, how many of your JCCs are actively engaged in leading PJ Library efforts? Good. On paper, PJ Library is about putting books of Jewish content and connection in the hands of young readers. But if you take a half step back, it's about getting families who have been in witness protection to raise their hand and to tell you that I may be in witness protection, but I want you to know my name and the name and ages of my children. And I want you to have my mailing address. It's an invitation to join them where they are and find a way to bring them into the organized Jewish community. And the books are nice too. But it's not about the books, and it's not about the campers, and it's not about the kids. It's about the collective opportunity we have to engage and enrich our interaction with the organized people in our community and those who want to be a part of what we do. So let me finish where I began. The unexpected silver lining from this wretched darkness that has been the pandemic of these last 3 years is that our place in the Jewish community and the Jewish world has become remarkably more recognizable and remarkably more prominent. And because of work that incredibly smart and inspired leaders in this room have done, we are involved in more collaborative and partnership initiative with local Jewish institutions of every stripe than I believe at any time in the history of our movement. We have taken our place at the center of Jewish life in more than 170 neighborhood towns and cities across the continent. And we are becoming a Jewish town square that has the potential to be transformational in what the future of the Jewish community is going to be. This conference stated that its intention, its slogan, was inspire and aspire. To come here to be inspired by the collective work of the hands in this room and to inspire Jewish communities to levels of vitality, enrichment, and engagement that they have yet to see. That we can come here and sit together and recognize that we are sitting at arguably the high point of the last 2,000 years of Jewish history. We are leading at a time of Jewish sovereignty after 100 generations that would have given their left arm for 5 minutes of what we've got. To have the chance to live at a time of self-sufficiency and self-determination. And we are operating in the largest and most successful diaspora Jewish community in the history of the world. We've got challenges and limitations and problems, but they are defined almost entirely by the degree to which we are willing to limit ourselves and our ambitions and our work ethic. There is nothing for which we can aspire to achieve that the tools and resources and opportunities are not sitting right in front of us. It's not good enough to be good enough, because we would be shortchanging ourselves and those who will follow us by not having capitalized on the moment that we have. That at the core, we are not about great JCCs and not about great summer camps. We are about greater Jewish communities, more vibrant Jewish life, measurable and intentional Jewish outcomes. And when we move into the vanguard in overt affirmation and pursuit of these things, resources and partners and supporters and fans and families will pour into our buildings and across our campuses to get a taste of what it is that we have the potential to make possible. That's the mission. Several years back, Sandy Carden, the founding CEO of the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Foundation, stood in front of this room in Miami Beach and looked around the room and he said, "It's you. You are the Kohanim. You are the priesthood of this generation of Jewish life in this time and in this place. What are we going to do with that mandate, that charge and that responsibility? If there's going to be a renaissance in Jewish life and Jewish community, we will be the authors." And I know it's intimidating, and I know it's daunting, and I know we'll look around at one another and say to ourselves, how is it possible that these few people here can be the linchpin in transformational change. And I will leave you with the words of Margaret Mead, great cultural anthropologist of the 20th century, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." May you and may we all go from strength to strength.